Hi everyone, Neil Malik from Knack Training bringing you Everyday Office video number 11. This is building dynamic drop-down menus in Microsoft Excel. So we'll start off as easy as possible here. If you go over to the G column in the spreadsheet, it's very likely that you want to make sure that the entries into cells G5 through G14 are only those things that are listed over in the Office's little list over there on the side. And this is not only because, somebody might say they work in Miami, but it's also just because people might just say Atlanta or they might just say Germany, and we want to make sure that they always enter the information the same way. So we're going to use data validation to make that happen. Data validation on the data tab at the top of the screen. As you can see here, halfway across, there's a green check mark, red no smoking sign icon right here. This is to let you know that you can restrict what somebody's capable of putting into a given cell. So when I click on it, you'll notice that these cells that I have selected, G5 through G14, are currently allowed to have literally any value in the entire world. You could type in a name, a date, does not matter. If I use the drop-down menu, you'll see that I can restrict this to things like, well, it's got to be a number, or it's got to be a date, or it's got to have a specific length to the text, etc. But right here in the middle is the list option, which allows us to create a drop-down menu. So I choose list, and then for source, I could manually type in the different offices into this field, but it makes a lot of sense if I've already got the offices written someplace in the spreadsheet to just go ahead and highlight all the offices that it might be, in this case B5 through B9. Then I click OK, and as you can see, the drop-down menu has the 5 entries that I'm looking for. But there is a limitation here, and that is that as you saw when I went into my data validation dialog box, it's specifically pinpointing cells B5 through B9. If I decide to open another office or I decide to close an office, there's nothing here allowing me to expand or contract that list over there on the left. So if you want to make a dynamic reference to this list on the left, there's an old school way of doing it with the offset function, but I much prefer the new way of doing things, which is to turn this into a table. So I click over here on the left-hand panel, this list of offices over here on the left. On the Insert tab at the top of the screen, I can choose the third button from the left, which is Insert a Table. As you can see there, it makes it easy to sort, filter, format data, but also it is a reference that will expand and contract. We'll see that in just a second here. Also note that you could use the keyboard shortcut Control-T to make this happen. So I click on Table. It says, okay, well, it seems like you've got a table with headers that's in B4 through B9. Is that correct? Yes. Click OK. And you can see it adds color to my table. I'm just going to use the Table Styles drop-down menu here and tell it to use no style. I don't want it to impact the way it looks. I just want it to be more functional for me. And in addition to that, I can uncheck the checkbox here for the filter button. I don't really need a filter on that drop-down menu there. But here's what I do need to fix. Right over here on the side, this table is called Table 1. And Table 1 doesn't really mean anything, so I'm going to rename this. Generally speaking, I like to use the abbreviation TBL to let people know when they're seeing this thing out in the world that this is a table. And here I'll go ahead and call it TBL Offices, and then just hit Enter on my keyboard. So now I know that there is a thing called TBL Offices that contains all my possible offices. So if I highlight G5 through G14 again, and I go back to the Data tab, and I go back to Data Validation, I should be able to add a source. But there's an unfortunate thing going on right here, and that is the Data Validation doesn't know how to directly reference a table yet. So in order to make this work, I would need to type in the indirect function, like that, and then in quotation marks, I could put in TBL offices. Close quotation marks, close parentheses. So now, using the indirect function, I can pass this thing a name that Excel can then figure out. It can figure out what TBL offices is. So I click OK here, and as you can see, the drop-down menu does include all 5 entries, but here's the big part right here. If I go down here to the bottom of the list and I add another office like Sao Paulo, Brazil, now the table grows in size to accommodate the new office, and when I use the drop-down menu, it includes Sao Paulo as well. There's a problem here, though, unfortunately, and that is if you have a really big spreadsheet and lots of what are called volatile functions, meaning they're functions that are constantly being recalculated, this will cause a lot of lag in your spreadsheet. So in this data validation, using the indirect function here is unfortunately going to cause the spreadsheet to do a few more extra repetitions than it needs to, a few more calculations than it needs to. So I'd like to avoid this indirect function if possible. So here's the end of the exercise. The end of the exercise is once you have a table built like this one, all you have to do is highlight all of the offices under the offices heading. Go to your Formulas tab at the top of the screen and click on Name Manager. And what you'll notice in here is, of course, first of all, it says there's this thing called TBL offices. But when I click New, this is creating a new named range, which is something that Excel has had since, I don't know, since a long time ago. And so because of this, we don't have to use the indirect function. So I'm going to name this office list, for example. Notice that the named range office list, which is different from a table, right? A table is this guy right down here, TBL offices, and then in square brackets, the column called offices. So the named range can effectively point at a column in a table, just like this, and it doesn't require us to use the indirect function, which will slow our spreadsheet down. So we type in a name for the range, click OK, and now when I click close and I go back to those cells one more time, and I go back to the data tab one more time, and I go back to data validation one more time, I don't need to use the indirect function. I'll take that out of the source. Now watch, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut F3 right here. F3 opens up the paste name dialog box. And notice that office list is here, but TBL offices is not. This is the difference in named ranges versus tables. I love tables. Tables are my favorite new thing in Excel, absolutely without a doubt. But unfortunately, there are a lot of tools in Excel that don't know how to use it yet. But they do know how to use named ranges like this. Hit OK, hit OK, et voila. You got your drop-down menu with all your offices on it. If you don't have an office in Sao Paulo anymore, you just reduce that down, take Sao Paulo out, and now the drop-down menu doesn't have Sao Paulo on it. If we decide to open up a new office in, I don't know, Barcelona, Spain, again, that table grows down, the named range goes with it. Barcelona, Spain is right there on the drop-down menu. So to create a dynamic drop-down menu instead of a static drop-down menu, convert this into a table and then assign that a name, and your data validation can use that named range more effectively than it can use a table range.